The carriage arrived at the manor house. Its wheels crushed the fresh snow. The Duke of Westmoreland stepped down. His boots were polished black leather. He did not look at the ground. He never looked down. His steward waited by the door. The man's face was pale. The Duke handed him his gloves. "Where is the seamstress?" the Duke said. His voice was cold. It held no question, only command. The steward bowed his head slightly. "In the sewing room, Your Grace." "Bring her to the hall." The great hall was vast. Stone walls held ancient tapestries. A fire roared in the hearth. Eleanor stood before it. She kept her eyes lowered. Her hands were rough from work. She held them still at her sides. The Duke walked a slow circle around her. He examined her like livestock. He stopped directly in front of her. "You are the seamstress," he stated. "Yes, Your Grace," Eleanor whispered. "You repaired the lady's gown." "I did, Your Grace." The Duke's expression did not change. His eyes were like flint. He reached into his coat pocket. He withdrew a piece of silk. It was the gown's sleeve. He held it up before her. A single seam was imperfect. The stitch was slightly uneven. He let the silk fall to the floor. "This work is an insult." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She said nothing. The Duke took one step closer. His voice dropped to a terrible whisper. "You are nothing." The words hung in the air. They were absolute, final. The fire crackled in the silence. He turned his back to her. "You will leave this house tonight. Take your child. Do not return. You are dismissed." He did not wait for a reply. He walked away. The steward looked at Eleanor. His eyes held pity, but he said nothing. He followed his master. Eleanor stood alone in the great hall. The imperfect silk lay at her feet. The snow began to fall outside. Eleanor walked home through the snow. Her cottage stood at the village edge. It was small and made of stone. Smoke curled from its chimney. It was a humble place, but it was clean. It was hers. Her son Thomas waited inside. He was 7 years old. He sat by the small fire. He was mending a wooden toy. He looked up as she entered. His smile faded instantly. He saw her face. "Mama," he said softly. She forced a smile for him. She removed her worn shawl. She hung it by the door. She went to the hearth. She stirred the thin soup there. The room was warm. It was filled with love. This was their entire world. 2 chairs, a table, a bed in the corner. Her sewing basket sat nearby. It held her livelihood, needles, thread, scissors. She had skill with her hands. It fed them. It kept the roof secure, until today. "We must pack our things, Thomas." The boy's eyes grew wide. He did not understand, but he obeyed. He fetched their small trunk. Eleanor moved with quiet efficiency. She folded their few clothes. She wrapped their meager dishes. She placed her sewing tools carefully. These were her weapons, her means of survival. She looked around the single room. Every object held a memory. The window where Thomas watched birds, the hearth where they told stories, the door that kept the world out. Soon it would not be theirs. The Duke's words echoed in her mind. "You are nothing." She looked at her son. She pushed the words away. For him, she was everything. The snow continued to fall outside. It fell heavier now. Night was coming. The steward arrived at dusk. He brought 2 footmen with him. They stood outside the cottage door. Their faces were blank. They were following orders, nothing more. The steward knocked once. Eleanor opened the door. She saw their expressions. Her heart sank. Thomas hid behind her skirts. "It is time, Mistress Clark." The steward's voice was flat. He avoided her eyes. Eleanor nodded slowly. She picked up their small trunk. It was not heavy. A life could be very light. Thomas carried his wooden toy. They stepped out into the snow. The footmen entered the cottage behind them. They began to secure the door. They were locking her out of her home. The cold air stole her breath. The wind cut through her shawl. She turned to the steward one last time. "Where shall we go?" she asked. The steward looked at the ground. He shifted his weight. He was uncomfortable. That is not His Grace's concern. He placed a small coin purse in her hand. It was pitifully light. A final payment. A dismissal. He turned and walked away. The footmen finished their task. They followed him without a word. Eleanor and Thomas stood alone. The village lane was empty. Windows were shuttered against the cold. No one saw them. No one came to help. The snow began to cover their footprints. Thomas looked up at his mother. His small face was frightened. "Mama, I am cold." She knelt in the snow before him. She wrapped her shawl around his shoulders. She had nothing else to give. She took his hand. They began to walk. They had no destination. The night grew darker around them. The wind howled like a beast. Eleanor saw a faint light ahead. It was the old church. Its door was never locked. It was their only hope. She pulled Thomas toward the distant glow. Behind them, a shadow moved in the lane. The church porch offered little shelter. The wind drove snow beneath its arches. Eleanor held Thomas close. They shared their body heat. The boy shivered violently. She knew they could not stay. The cold would claim them by morning. She had to find better refuge. She peered out into the storm. The world was a wall of white. Then she saw it, a dark shape in the road. It was not moving. It was a man. He lay collapsed in the snow. Eleanor stood immediately. She did not hesitate. "Stay here, Thomas. Do not move." She rushed into the blinding wind. The snow was deep. It pulled at her skirts. She reached the fallen man. He was well dressed. His coat was fine wool, but it was not enough. His face was pale. His lips were blue. He was not breathing well. She shook his shoulder gently. He did not respond. He was a gentleman, and he was dying. She looked back at the church porch, at her waiting child. Then she looked at the stranger. She made her choice. She removed her own shawl. She wrapped it around the man's neck. She began to rub his hands fiercely. She needed to get him warm. "Sir, you must wake up." Her voice was raw from the cold. She kept rubbing his hands. She saw a flicker in his eyelids. He groaned softly. He was alive. With great effort, she pulled him up. She draped his arm over her shoulders. She was small. He was heavy. She dragged him toward the church, step by agonizing step. Thomas watched from the porch. His eyes were wide with fear. Eleanor finally reached the stone steps. She lowered the man against the wall. She was breathing hard. Her own fingers were numb. The stranger's eyes opened fully. They were clear and intelligent. They focused on her face. He saw her sacrifice. He saw her poverty. He saw her child. He said nothing, but his gaze held a profound weight. The Duke's world was still warm, but a crack had just formed. The Duke's manor blazed with light. A ball was in full swing. Carriages lined the drive. Laughter spilled from open windows. The Duke stood by the fireplace. He held a glass of port. He surveyed his glittering guests. He felt a deep satisfaction. The troublesome seamstress was gone. Order was restored. His wife's gown was perfect now. A new seamstress had been hired. She worked in silence. She knew her place. The Duke smiled to himself. His steward approached him cautiously. The man bowed. "Your Grace, A matter requires attention. Speak, the Duke commanded. It concerns the cottage, Your Grace. The widow's cottage is now empty. The rent is unpaid. The magistrate inquires about its disposition. The Duke waved a dismissive hand. His voice was loud. Several guests turned to listen. Let the magistrate sell it, for back taxes. The woman is gone. She was nothing, a stain on the property. Let the law erase her. His words carried across the room. The guests nodded in agreement. They admired his decisiveness, his strength. The Duke enjoyed their approval. He took another sip of port. He saw his wife across the room. She wore the repaired gown. It was flawless. He had been right. Perfection was his standard. Mercy was a weakness. The music swelled. The dancing continued. Outside, the storm still raged. But inside, all was warmth. All was power. The Duke did not think of the cold. He did not think of the church. He believed his world was secure. He believed his judgment was final. He was wrong. The stranger in the snow was now awake, and he was asking questions. The stranger regained his strength slowly. The village vicar had taken them in. He gave them a room by the kitchen. A fire burned in the grate. The stranger sat in a chair. He watched Eleanor. She was tending to Thomas. She gave the boy her portion of bread. The stranger's name was Alistair Finch. He spoke little at first. His voice was calm. It carried quiet authority. He finally addressed Eleanor directly. You saved my life last night. Eleanor kept her eyes down. She was mending a torn shirt. Anyone would have done the same, sir. No, Alistair said firmly. Not anyone. You had nothing. You gave your only warmth. You risked your child. Tell me your name. Eleanor Clark, sir. And why were you in that storm, Eleanor Clark? The question hung in the air. Eleanor's hands stilled. She did not want to speak, but his gaze was kind. It demanded truth. She told him everything. The imperfect stitch, the Duke's cruel words, the locked cottage door, the walk into the freezing night. Alistair listened without interruption. His expression grew grave. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. He looked into the fire. Then he reached inside his coat. He withdrew a sealed envelope. It was heavy parchment. It bore an official wax seal. He did not open it. He held it in his hands. He looked at Eleanor. The Duke of Westmoreland, Alistair said slowly. He told you that you were nothing. Eleanor nodded once. A single tear fell. She wiped it away quickly. Alistair looked at the envelope. Then he looked back at her. His eyes held a new intensity. He is mistaken. And this document proves it. The law will hear your story. I will make certain of it. He placed the envelope on the table between them. The seal seemed to glow in the firelight. Eleanor did not know its contents, but she felt a shift in the air. The world was no longer solid, not for the Duke. A week passed. The snow melted into gray slush. Life in the village continued. The Duke's ball was forgotten. New gossip took its place. Then the rider arrived. He wore the livery of the High Court. He carried a formal summons. He went directly to the manor. The Duke received it in his study. He broke the seal with irritation. He read the document quickly. His face darkened with rage. He crushed the parchment in his fist. A court hearing regarding the seamstress. This is an outrage. His steward stood nervously by the door. On who issued the summons, Your Grace? Judge William Pendleton, on behalf of the Crown. I am ordered to appear, to answer allegations of unlawful eviction. This is nonsense. The woman is a nobody. But the Duke felt a prick of unease. Judge Pendleton was formidable. He was not a man to ignore. The Duke smoothed the crumpled summons. He read it again. His eyes caught a specific detail. The petition was brought by a third party, a man named Alistair Finch. The name meant nothing to the Duke. He tossed the summons onto his desk. "Prepare the carriage. We go to the county seat tomorrow. I will end this farce personally. The judge will see reason. The law is on my side." The next morning, the Duke departed. He wore his finest coat. He projected absolute confidence. The county court was a solemn building. Stone pillars framed its entrance. The Duke entered the main hall. He expected a quiet chamber. He was wrong. The public gallery was full. Villagers filled the benches. They whispered among themselves. The Duke saw Eleanor Clark. She sat at a small table. She wore a clean, simple dress. She did not look at him. A man sat beside her. It was the stranger from the snow, Alistair Finch. He met the Duke's gaze directly. He showed no fear. The Duke's confidence wavered for a second. The judge entered the room. Everyone rose. The hearing began. Judge Pendleton was an older man. His eyes were sharp. He called the court to order. He spoke with quiet authority. The Duke's solicitor stood first. He presented the Duke's case. He spoke of property rights. He spoke of contractual obligations. He spoke of defective work. He painted Eleanor as negligent, a burden on the estate. The Duke listened with a smug smile. It was a convincing argument. Then Alistair Finch stood. He approached the judge's bench. He placed the envelope on the wood. "Your Honor, I submit new evidence. This document changes everything." The judge opened the envelope carefully. He read its contents in silence. The room waited. The Duke's smile began to fade. The judge looked up. His gaze settled on the Duke. It was not friendly. "Your Grace, you evicted this woman. You cast her into a winter storm. With a child. Is this true?" The Duke stood. He straightened his coat. He tried to sound dismissive. "The cottage was mine. The work was unsatisfactory. I acted within my rights." "You told her she was nothing," the judge stated. The Duke hesitated. He had said it proudly. Now it sounded ugly. "It was a figure of speech, Your Honor." Judge Pendleton's voice grew louder. It filled the silent hall. "Let us discuss your rights, Your Grace. This document is a royal charter. It governs your estate's tenancies. It is 400 years old. You are bound by its terms. It states clearly, no tenant may be dispossessed in winter, not without a formal court review. You ignored this law. You played judge and executioner." The Duke's face went pale. He had never read the charter. The judge continued. His words were measured and devastating. "You broke a royal covenant for a single imperfect stitch. You endangered 2 lives. You showed no mercy. The law sees this. The law condemns it." The public gallery stirred. The villagers leaned forward. The Duke was losing control. He could feel it. The Duke tried to regain his footing. He addressed the judge directly. His voice was tight with anger. "This is a technicality, Your Honor. The woman is a seamstress, nothing more. The charter is ancient history. My authority on my land is absolute." Judge Pendleton did not blink. He turned his attention to Alistair. "Mr. Finch, you brought this petition. You witnessed the aftermath. Explain your interest in this case." Alistair stood again. He looked at Eleanor. Then he looked at the Duke. His voice was calm, but carried far. "I am a barrister, Your Honor. I serve the Crown's Circuit Court. I was traveling that night. My carriage lost a wheel in the storm. I sought shelter on foot. I succumbed to the cold. I would have died. Eleanor Clark found me. She had just been thrown from her home. She had her son with her. She had one shawl. She gave it to me. She dragged me to safety. She saved my life with her last strength. He paused. The courtroom was utterly silent. I asked her why she was out there. She told me her story. She spoke of the Duke. She spoke of his words. "You are nothing." I then asked the villagers. They confirmed her character. They confirmed her skill. They confirmed her sudden homelessness. I reviewed the estate's charter. I found the violation. I brought the evidence here. Alistair turned fully to face the Duke. His next words were deliberate. "You see a technicality, Your Grace. I see a profound injustice. You see a nobody. I see a woman of immense courage. The law is not ancient history. It is the foundation of your privilege. You have broken it, and now you must answer." The Duke felt the eyes of the room. They were all against him. The villagers nodded. The judge's expression was stern. The Duke's absolute authority was crumbling, in public, for all to see. Judge Pendleton allowed a moment of silence. He let Alistair's words settle. He let the Duke feel the weight. Then the judge spoke. His voice was final. "The evidence is clear. The law is clear. Your Grace, you acted unlawfully. You violated a royal covenant. You inflicted cruel hardship. You abused your position." The Duke opened his mouth to protest. The judge raised a hand. He silenced him. "You will listen now. This is my judgment. First, the cottage is restored to Eleanor Clark, immediately, with all backdated rents repaid by your estate." A murmur of approval swept the gallery. Eleanor clasped her hands together. She did not look up. "Second, you will pay a substantial fine. For contempt of the charter, the fine will go to the Crown and to the village poor fund." The Duke's face flushed with humiliation. He was being fined, like a common merchant. "Third, and most significantly, you will make public restitution. Here in this court, you will apologize to Eleanor Clark. You will retract your words." The Duke stared in disbelief. Apologize? To a seamstress? In front of everyone? It was unthinkable. It was a destruction of his dignity. He stood frozen. The judge waited. The entire room waited. The Duke looked at the villagers. He saw their satisfied faces. He saw Eleanor. She finally looked at him. Her eyes held no triumph, only quiet strength. He saw Alistair Finch. The barrister's gaze was unwavering. The Duke was trapped. His wealth could not save him. His title could not save him. The law had him in its grip. He had to speak. The words would cost him everything. He had built his world on arrogance. Now it demanded humility. He took a shallow breath. He prepared to speak. The Duke's voice was barely a whisper. It cracked with strained pride. "I apologize for my actions." The judge leaned forward. His voice boomed in the quiet hall. "Speak clearly, Your Grace. Address the woman you wronged. Retract your words." The Duke swallowed hard. He looked directly at Eleanor. He forced the words out. "Mistress Clark, I apologize for your eviction. It was unjust. My words to you were cruel. You are not nothing." The sentence hung in the air. It was a complete surrender. The public gallery released a collective breath. The Duke's shoulders slumped. His power was gone. It had evaporated in this room. The judge gave a final nod. "The court's judgment is satisfied. This proceeding is concluded." The gavel fell. The sound was sharp, final. The villagers began to talk excitedly. They surrounded Eleanor. They offered congratulations and kindness. The Duke stood alone. His steward approached him cautiously. The man's face was ashen. The Duke turned without a word. He walked toward the great doors. No one spoke to him. No one met his eye. He was a ghost in his own life. He stepped out into the gray daylight. His carriage waited. It felt like a cage. Inside the hall, Alistair approached Eleanor. He smiled gently. He placed a key in her hand. It was the key to her cottage. The law has served its purpose, Eleanor. Go home. Your son is waiting. Eleanor looked at the key. Then she looked at Alistair. Tears of relief filled her eyes, but they did not fall. Thank you, sir, for everything. Thank you, Alistair replied, for my life and for your courage. Eleanor walked out of the courthouse. The sun broke through the clouds. It warmed her face for the first time in weeks. She walked back to her village. She walked back to her home. She was not nothing. She was a woman who had faced a duke, and she had won. The arrogant are often blind to the true foundations of power. True strength is not in a title, it is in character. And character is the one thing no court can take away. Have you ever watched someone cruel finally get exactly what they deserved? Tell me your story in the comments below, and tell me where in the world you are watching from today. If justice was served today, subscribe to Divine Justice Stories and leave your like below. Every story here is proof that arrogance never wins in the end. New stories every single week.